Turkish Capital Markets Congress is continuing full speed. Where are we in environmental friendly approaches and transition to green economy? Mr. İsmail Güllü, the head of the Turkish Exporters Association. We were the pioneers of this transition. We want to produce for the world without depleting the world, and we have 12 main goals in the sustainable plan. And we want to increase our experts with a sustainable development model, and we want to be everyone's number one preference. And our scientific board consists of academics and professors speedily on an industrial basis in order to be able to make sectoral assessments. The action plans were supported for each industry. Right after that, the Turkish textile industry sustainability action plan was announced. As the exporters family, we have placed our hand under the stone. So hopefully the goals in the action plan will be materialized one by one to carry Turkey into a brand position in terms of sustainability. Of course, when we become a brand, this is going to mark a new era in our exports. Our export family have given us historical accomplishments. In the last 2 months, we had exports over $40 billion. This was a record-breaking figure in the history of the Republic. In the last 12 months, this figure has exceeded $215 billion. And we want to crown this increasing trend with green transformation. And we believe that we will reach the Turkish goals. In some industries, there is an infrastructure that is deep-seated, but in emerging industries, the investment appetite is quite high. And particularly in terms of new investments, creating it with an environmentally friendly approach is very important for a new era in this regard. And as the exporters family, as we did up until now, from this point forward, we will continue to ceaselessly work for sustainable exports. Dear bureaucrats and dear representatives of the business world, dear participants, as I end my words here, I would like to congratulate Turkish Exporters Assembly for this title selection, and I wish the best for the 5th Congress of this endeavor. And I would like to greet you all of the Turkish Capital Markets Association. Thank you, dear Chairman. Our first panel is starting. We have had many important guests, but I have a warmer approach here because our future, our industry, our life developments will be affected. Climate change, climate friendly, low carbon economic transformation. What kind of steps can we take to ensure this? We will be discussing them. This is a critical title. As you know, in the end of 2019, around December, the European Green Deal was on the table, and carbon border adjustment mechanism and carbon tax, COP26 and Paris Convention were hot topics. Protecting and improving human health, that is ensuring our health and our children's health improved, and creating employment, higher incomes and increasing social prosperity are among the topics we need. There's one final note, as Mr. Minister has emphasized in the morning, the issue of financing is paramount for transforming into green economy, and our guests will be talking about this: sustainability loans, green bonds, and dear steps. What will be obtained? Green washing or the European taxonomy? What are the boundaries in that regard? We will be discussing these and assessing the recent topics and the steps taken after the Green Action Plan will be discussed by Mr. Orhan Solak. He is the head of the Climate Change and Adaptation Department coming from the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization and Directorate General of Environment Management. He flew from Glasgow, particularly for this panel. So the first question goes to him. From a public perspective, how do you observe, when should the business world start adapting as the regulating body? What are your views on this? And the ETS system or the carbon tax system, and what are your other comments? And perhaps you can talk about the COP26 observations and Glasgow observations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eray. Being in this Congress, Turkish Capital Markets Congress is very important for me. I would like to congratulate you and thank you for your invitation. As we all know, climate change is one of the most important global challenges that we're facing. And the world has started calling climate change the climate crisis because it has reached a crisis dimension, making it mandatory to take measures. Our country is in the Mediterranean basin, and every year we've got droughts, floods, landslides, and wildfires, the frequency and severity of which are increasing every single year, and the economic impacts of the crisis are at striking levels. And if we don't reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this century, the costs will change between $250 trillion to $792 trillion. And compliance with climate change and climate resistance, 1 unit of investment to be spent will help us avoid 11 units of disaster expenditures. And in struggling climate change, the cost, in addition to the cost shrinks, it will bring about new investments, business, and employment opportunities also are brought. And by 2030, $26 trillion of economic benefit can be ensured via SDGs. And we have active engagement in this process. As of 2021, November 10, we were a signatory party to the Paris Convention. This passed from the Parliament in October. And for 2053, our president announced net zero emissions. And this was defined as the green development revolution. As we all know, green development means a comprehensive transformation in all industries. In struggling climate change, net zero targets require not only the state, but all the actors, the civil society, the business world, and the private sector's active involvement in this process should be at the highest level as of paramount importance. And in order to ensure stakeholder involvement, in January 2022, we will be holding the Climate Council. We are working on a climate law, and our climate change strategy and action plan is being updated in line with the 2053 targets. The national contribution declaration that we had submitted in 2015 are also being updated. Climate-friendly and clean production technologies investments will be supported in emission systems, and we are in the Climate Council, together with all the stakeholders, we will identify a joint intelligence and a joint approach, which will be supported and which will be reflected in the legislation and strategy works. And our ministry also formulated a new change, and our ministry is now called the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, and Climate Change. And there's an independent department that consists of 218 employees and 8 departments. And this is meaningful for international actors. The green development movement that our country initiated constitutes a strong signal in this regard. In terms of our country's access to international financing, this process will make our hand stronger, and it is going to sharpen the competitive edge of our industries internationally. When you look at the developments in the European Union, of course, the European Union recently announced a Green Deal, and by 2050, the greenhouse gas emissions will be zero net, and the target is to be the first carbon neutral continent. And the European Union's industries transformation will also require competitive edge protection, and energy and carbon intensive products will be subject to carbon border adjustment mechanism. And the carbon, these are cement, electricity, aluminum, fertilizer, and steel industries. And the schedule is the 2023 to 2025 will be the transition phase, and there will be an incremental application as of 2026. The EU is an important trade partner for Turkey, and of course, implementing measures are risky for our industry and exports, because 42% of our exports in this year was to the EU, and under the coordination of the Ministry of Trade, there was a task force for Green Deal, and in July, the Green Deal Action Plan was announced, and all our institutions are working towards this action plan. And I wanted to, let me summarize what we did. Greenhouse gas emissions monitoring regulations require that since 2015, the greenhouse gas emissions are being monitored at the plant level. 700 plants are in our system, and the total emissions of our system, half of them are being monitored in the system. And the emission reports are verified by independent entities to come up with reliable data. And the system is compliant with the EU legislation. And in comparison with the other countries, this is a developed system, and this gives us right data. And the emission trade system has its e-blue system in its foundations. Between 2013 and 2017, there will be a carbon market preparation partnership with the World Bank, and we're working in close cooperation. We have worked in close cooperation with the stakeholders. The upper limits and the allocations were identified with the model studies, and emission trade system registration software codes have been completed, and also the necessary legislative infrastructure for ETS have also been prepared within the scope of these efforts. And the current developments in the world in terms of carbon pricing and carbon markets, volume increases are continuing. For instance, volunteer carbon markets, compared to last year, there was a 60% value increase in worth. And if this trend continues until the end of the year, there will be a $1 billion volume in the volunteer carbon markets. And when you look at the overall volume in 2020, there was a 23% increase, reaching $240 billion at a global scale. And when 2020 is completed, with the increase of the market volume, there will be a 5-year consecutive growth, reaching $300 billion. As you know, Glasgow, Scotland, hosted the 26th COP26 meeting. And let me summarize the outcomes. Forest laws and reversing land deterioration, ferrosteel industries, low emission and clean and climate compatible targets are to be adopted. Zero emission vehicles are to be incentivized. Coal utilization are to be reduced with certain country national decisions, and market mechanisms as well as non-market mechanisms, as well as the national contribution declarations of the countries were to be associated with a rule, because there was no consensus for 5 years, but the Paris Book of Rules was completed during that meeting. And in line with the decisions made, in the coming years, the United Nations Secretariat will develop a registration system using 2 different methods. So international carbon credit transfer one will be trade between the countries, and the other will be a United Nations central registration system. This system that is like the Kyoto mechanisms, our country will be a player. And I wanted to give you this very important development. So a climate-driven development is inevitable in our world. We're a young and dynamic country, so we can easily adapt to any change in circumstances. So in transition to carbon economy, we trust our country's capabilities, and our president announced the Green Development Revolution movement with a climate and environment focus. And we believe that these efforts will grow every single year, and our country will become one of the leading countries in this regard. Thank you very much.
Teşekkürler. Çok değerli açıklamalar paylaştınız. Bizler için çok önemli. Mr. Orhan, thank you so much for your remarks. It was quite valuable, and let me emphasize a couple of things again. The climate law and climate forum will take place soon, and of course, receiving support from private sector, I am sure you will be successful in your endeavors. And also, when it comes to carbon tax, and the fact that initial steps will start in 2023 and it will be fully implemented in 2016 is important. And you mentioned the PMR project, which will both bring about the software capabilities as well as the much needed legislation. And what you briefed us about carbon transfer was quite important too. And now let's continue with our second panelist, who is Shirin Soysal, coming from KPMG, Turkey Audit and Assurance Sustainability Services partner. And could you first and foremost give us a global picture and how and where we are in Turkey in a macro perspective? So there is a lot to do, but what should companies do? What are the steps to be taken? And I leave the floor to you. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, let me express how happy I am to be among many expert names thanks to the Turkish Capital Markets Congress. Well, when it comes to tackling with the climate change, the recent developments accelerated the efforts. And just like Mr. Orhan stated, by 2050, EU has an ambitious goal to become carbon neutral. And after announcing their preparations, many countries announced their carbon neutral goals. Japan, the States, China, and us, Turkey, announced that we want to become a carbon neutral country by 2030. But we also have an adaptation plan for 2050, but compared to 1990s, reducing the emissions by 15% would be another important step in the same direction. And this is not just an industrial revolution, but this will bring about a revolution in many sectors like transportation, agricultures, buildings, and efficient resource utilization. This is another transformational area. And like you say, there is this sustainable development goal based on climate change, and this would require the generation of related policies. And sustainable financing should also be included in all these efforts, because thinking of all the transformation, the companies would need a preparation phase, just like the countries. And as KPMG Turkey, we joined a research, first net zero readiness indices. This index focused on countries and ranked them based on how ready they are. And Norway comes forward among the leading oil exporters, but they are quite ready because they have invested in the renewables and they prioritize electrical vehicles both on the public and on the private side. So they are in the forefront, and Turkey ranks number 24. And while this research was carrying out, we had not signed the Paris Convention yet, but after signing the convention, I believe that Turkey will climb in that ranking. And one of the most important details of the research was that together with the commitments of the countries and their rankings, well, it was obvious their commitments bring countries success. And it also has its reflections on the welfare of the related communities, and there is a positive correlation. And this was also discussed in COP26. So developed countries should support developing countries in these endeavors, and they will contribute significantly. And lately, there were several steps taken in this direction, which was quite positive. Well, in terms of energy need, Turkey still relies on coal reserves. So our government should come up with a long-term plan to focus on wind and hydro capabilities. Our government should focus on renewables, and the power generated from renewables will be valuable. And carbon border mechanisms and practices would also change export opportunities, but this might bring opportunities on its own, because companies taking care of all these arrangements and adapting themselves and accelerating their efforts would be valuable. And like you said, let's take a look at the micro perspective of countries and then move on to companies. Well, companies, actually large corporations, started to announce their net zero liabilities and commitments, because companies are aware of one thing. When we talk about sustainability, or in order for companies to continue with their activities, it's not enough to be financially stable. They also have to focus on economic, social, and environmental issues. They have to contribute to those issues. They have to seize opportunities, and they have to create a value if they want to continue to be present. And they have become aware on this fact. And looking at the risks, well, in the past, risks were surrounded around economy or geopolitics, but now the five worst risks are extreme weather conditions, loss of biodiversity, natural phenomena, and human-related natural disasters, and all sorts of human-related incidents. So all these bear high risks. And these are actually not individual risks, but they are interlinked risks. For example, think of the COVID-19. This was a pandemic. Maybe this is a biodiversity loss, but it had social, economical, and social losses, which show the companies that risk management is crucial for all companies. Companies used to understand risk management as identifying risks and coming up with risk systems. But it's not just limited to that anymore. You have to be both reactive and proactive, and non-financial risks should always be included. Well, we always talk about risks, but let's emphasize opportunities too, because all risks bring their own opportunities. So if companies want to turn risks into opportunities, well, then they have to include them in their adaptation and transformation plans. Let me give you a Tesla example. Tesla brought an electrical vehicle transformation. This was an met opportunity. So maybe we can start talking about opportunities too. Companies can now have access to sustainable indices, and if they can become successful, then they can pay lower interest rates and they can bring a financial contribution too. So companies should realize such opportunities. Risks can also bring financial consequences. And when you think of climate and climate change, this is included in the financial risks. Climate-related value losses. For example, if you are a company investing in coal, then maybe you have to evaluate your preferences, because there might be climate-related consequences. So by year end, I believe climate will be included in the financial risks as well. So what can we recommend to companies? Well, I would like to recommend TSFDs announced a series of task forces, and they include a lot of recommendations such as governance, climate-related risks and opportunities, who manages them, who assesses those risks, where is the leadership? Because talking about risks, and especially when it comes to decarbonization or carbon reduction, these topics require leadership. So in this sense, governance must be reassessed by companies. And another thing is strategy. Again, climate-related risks, opportunities, and business models, financing, finance plannings or their business activities. What is the situation in individual companies? Think of this, any climate scenario that focuses on the globe getting warmer by 1.5 or 2 degrees and the consequences. Are you including all of those scenarios in your own scenarios, and how do you position yourself? And finally, if you want to track and monitor if you want to scale something, you have to monitor something. So how do you scale yourself? How do you measure, or how do you monitor your performance? And actually, reliability is also important. As you set goals to become net zero, then how do you make your calculations? How do you calculate carbon? What are your plans to mitigate it? What is your governance? How do you include these sets of data in your activities? And also, it's not just pretend, but because you have to announce everything to public, let's verify and intensify our reliability. The circular economy is a great response to Green Deal and related calls, and our country still has a lot of steps to take. And in this respect, the products of the companies should go through a life cycle assessment so that efficiency can be identified, as well as the waste management, because there might be additional steps to be taken there. I suppose I only have a minute left, so let's focus on the efficiency of financing methods. Like I said, TCFD or focusing on circular economy is great, but during COP, remember, ISF Foundation announced its international sustainability standards. They announced the establishment of this institution, which is quite a great progress in this field. So now I believe that performance and sustainability will have a proper and a single framework, and the connections can be established in the near future. Integrated reporting is also something new, but it is the future of corporate reporting, I believe. Right now, when you look at corporate reporting, this integration is essential because their previous performance and their future strategies will be combined in this integrated reporting. It will be a great instrument for all companies, and this is where the entire world is leaning to. So in the future, I believe that we will hear a lot more on integrated reporting. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much again for your kind invitation. Miss Shirin, thank you so much. You gave us such an answer that I filled an entire page while taking notes from your answers. You touched upon many important things, for example, risk mapping changed, and now rather than financial risks, we are talking about climate risks, but all risks come with their own opportunities. And you mentioned important establishments like the foundation, and you concluded with the importance of integrated reporting, scaling and data verification. These are crucial, and carbon accounting. Well, These are all important aspects of the financial world. And financial instruments would be great for the overall transformation. So while talking about all of these, let me introduce Mr. Erhan Çalışkan, coming from the Development and Investment Bank of Turkey, and he's the head of sustainability and environmental social impact management. Well, we have discussed a lot of things. We discussed tackling with climate change and transformation, but how do you look at these issues through the eyes of an investment banker and a development banker? What are your strategies in this front? How can your bank contribute to all of these efforts? Well, thank you so much. First, let me say how pleased I am to be among expert names, and I want to thank Turkish Capital Markets Board and related institutions for realizing such an important event. Well, it is obviously stated. Mr. Orhan shared his observations during COP26. He mentioned the related regulatory preparations, and Ms. Shirin shared an independent perspective. But let me share a development and investment bank perspective in terms of climate change. Let me walk you through on how we see the latest, both in our country and around the globe. Well, let's start with the global developments. Together with the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization, we took part in COP26, and as you know, compared to 1870s, which were the years of industrial revolution, and since the early years that we started to measure the effects of carbon emissions, we see that there is a temperature increase of 5.6 degrees, and we're facing many threats, such as the biodiversity loss and everything. And then this is just the outcome of the temperature getting warmer by just 1.1 degrees. But where would all the NDCs take us? Well, the IPCC has prepared an important report thanks to the contribution of many science people. Well, the Paris Convention states that we are far behind the target of stopping the temperature getting warmer by 2 degrees by 2100. But looking at the projections compared to 2010 emissions, we have to reduce the emissions by 40% by 2030. But what can we do? There is this 16% increase in emission, and we have to stop deforestation. We have to reduce methane release. We have to stop using coal. We need further steps in transformation. So we need the utilization of clean energy and related technologies. Steps in these domains would help us fill the gap, but we are still quite far from Paris goals. And what needs to be done here is this is not a terminal disease. When you're talking about climate change and preventions, well, what needs to be done is clear. We need more renewable energy. We need efficient utilization. We need clean energy, and we need circular economy, biodiversity. So there is a lot to do, both on these fronts and on the adaptation front, and the prescription and what needs to be done is quite clear. And of course, financing is one of the most important topics in this respect.
And in this financing process, other than the developments there, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Energy have had important efforts, particularly one of the biggest steps to prevent climate change were done with renewable energy investments. Our countries installed energy is 53% by renewables. We've got energy efficiency action plan. We have a route about circular energy, and we have zero wastes and biodiversity. We are the signatories of many important biodiversity deals. There was a 2015 neutral carbon target. There was a Green Deal action plan. And with the increase of renewable energy installed power, our country total emissions were in a decreasing trend. It was 526 million tons in 2016. As of 2019, it is down to 509 million tons. So there's a decreasing trend. So in 2020 and 2021, we believe that this declining trend will continue. Renewable energies are increasing, and also limited production in industry due to COVID-19 are responsible for that. But our route is certain, and we are in this green development process. All our legislation, all our preparations, all the public institutions' efforts, including our bank, are in this direction. So now, as a bank on the finance industry side, what can we say as an addition? The preventing climate change and compliance there are different instruments. And as the Turkish Development and Investment Bank, we are independent from classical banks. Because we cannot collect term deposits, the international Asian infrastructure, KfW, World Bank are institutions like that. So we are collecting thematic loans in line with international standards. So we're bringing these loans to the Turkish investors. And with these investments, we have financed renewables totaling 3,000 megawatts, and 63% of our portfolio is directly and indirectly contributing to the United Nations SDGs. And our route is similarly, there's no coal thermal plant in our portfolio. So on the bank side, our path from this point forward is to reveal the emissions in our portfolio. And we believe we got advantages because our portfolio is focusing on renewables and resource efficiency investments. We don't have coal power thermal plants. Other than the funds provided by the banks, our investors, the Turkish industrialists, they can use alternative or innovative financing methods. One is sustainable and green bonds that will be directed through the capital markets. And the real industry in our country has had successful issues on the green and sustainable bonds. And the definition of sustainable bonds doesn't have green only, social is in it as well. And in terms of social bonds, starting from the COVID-19, health investments brought about a significant acceleration. And currently, the development on the green bonds has reached $128 trillion. It has reached 3 trillion out of the 123 trillion conventional pool. It was half of it 3 years ago. So in the last 2 years, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, sustainable and green bonds volume doubled. And for these issuances of bonds, As Ms. Shirin also mentioned, our institution are working on more reporting, more transparency, and creating their sustainability teams, measuring their impacts and risks, and monitoring international standards. They can take important actions in this regard, and these actions should be considered as independent from financial risks, but as a development bank, as required by our mission, we have a responsibility to contribute to the society's health and individuals' health. So independently from whatever we do, we have to prioritize this in our agenda. And this is the case for all entities. We need to give more priority. Eray, you mentioned in the beginning, the issue of greenwashing. And this is one of the issues that the European Union taxonomy European Union Green Deal is focusing on this, and there are significant actions that need to be taken within the scope of the European Green Deal. We keep talking about the carbon tax, but there is biodiversity, there is waste management, wastewater management, from agriculture, from the land to the dinner table. There are many subcomponents, and the actions about this will be taken in our country under the coordination of the Ministry of Trade. We prepared the Green Deal Action Plan, and we're a part of those task forces, and we will be contributing for the transformation as well. And as an institution, particularly on the capital market side, we have had two successful issuances. The first transition bond, low carbon economy transition bond, was issued by us. And at the same time, last week, we have issued the first social sukuk of our country. I'm not talking about the social part, but on the capital market side, we also believe giving mediation intermediary services is very important, and that we need to prepare our institutions for this. And we are monitoring the global developments closely, and more transparency, more reporting, and there is a $420 billion total wealth management of 146 entities by IFC. We will be focusing more on measurement and reporting. Thank you once again for your question and for giving me the floor. Thank you, Mr. Erhan, for your explanations. We have not made several comprehensive notes, and the topics conveyed by all panelists require even new panels, but this is a brief summary. Coal exit and transportation emissions and sustainability goals from Glasgow. You talked about taxonomy or greenwashing and the importance of being protected from its effects. And our companies' measurements need to be done. Their sustainability structures need to be managed better. They need to be protected from financial risks, and they need to be prepared for this. You have noted, drawn our attention. Just to make an addition to this, there's a specialized area, stock markets. Another valuable speaker, Mr. Kerem Aksoy from Borsa Istanbul. He's the product development department manager. And we talked about carbon markets, what kind of practices there are, what kind of stock markets we're talking about. So if you can briefly summarize them, it'll be much appreciated. In the European Union, in the practices in Turkey, where are we headed? And also, what is the new setting for Borsa Istanbul? What kind of an opportunity do we have? And what can Borsa Istanbul contribute to us for more opportunities? Thank you. I would like to thank everyone in the panel. Our topics are different from the general framework, but nevertheless, I want to provide you visuals with my presentation. So what is the carbon market? What are we planning to do with ETS? And we have held numerous meetings with the Ministry of Environment. So what is a carbon market and what are the objectives? So carbon market is a market where carbon emission permits are traded. And what are the objectives of the carbon market? There are a few main objectives, and one of the most important ones is to increase the emission reduction policy options of our country. And this is one of the first and foremost objectives as a country, as an institution. And second is to ensure transition to clean energies as a result of the carbon pricing. And the third one, which is also important for us, ensuring integration with international markets. So both as a mediator of capital markets and both because our country is both an imports and exports intensive country, this is important for us. And finally, one of the major issues which is going to impact our country is the carbon tax. And to reduce the financial loss, what we call the ETS system, the Turkish and its emission trading system, and the Turkish abbreviation is the same, ETS. We want to reduce these financial burdens that might be brought about by the carbon tax. And what is this carbon border adjustment mechanism? This is to expand this EU system into outside the EU system. And the basic motivation is it's aluminum, ferrosteel, fertilizers, electricity, and cement. These 5 selected industries, they offer, taking into account the carbon content, will bring about a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And this is going to begin in January 2023, and there will be a transition phase that does not bring a financial load for 3 years. It's like an adaptation stage. So that adaptation is also important for us. And what you see is this European Union carbon border adjustment mechanism shows, you see this ranking, Russia, China, Turkey. So the exports to the EU, they're talking about our main industries: aluminum, cement, electricity, fertilizers, and ferrosteel. We see this concentration and the distribution among themselves, and we're in the top 3 countries that are likely to be affected. So what is this carbon border adjustment mechanism? This carbon allocate, this is a market-based system where carbon allocations can be traded in a certain market. And when the perspective is finalized, we saw that we can adjust this CBAM in 4 steps. First of all, we need to identify, first is the scope. Second is the upper limit of the emission caps, and the allocations. The next issue is allocations. This is very important because if you are unable to formulate them well, there will be restrictions that will come from the China carbon border adjustment mechanism. And giving temporary flexibilities is the next step. The provisional flexibilities mean certain industries being able to trade in this market. 6 is watching market stability, because if you're creating a market, this market needs to be liquid, easily tradable, and accessible by everyone. And this is what we concentrated on in all the meetings. And the 7th issue is surveillance and compliance with legislation. The Ministry of Environment is compatible with the EU, both in terms of its law and legislation and practice. And this market-based, we can integrate, we want to have a structure that we can integrate with them. And 8 is active involvement of the stakeholders. This is more important than all, because what we call the market is where there's more liquid and where people can actually trade. And in Europe, in other stock markets, in other carbon border adjustment mechanisms, certain issues were experienced. And with the other emission trade systems, we can ensure for international integration. And item 10 is implementation, assessment and improvement, and constant monitoring, checking the best practices and making improvements. And the advantages of the emission trade system, when we look at the pros and cons of it, we are going to disregard the disadvantages and focus on the advantages. And one of the biggest advantages is that what we call carbon tax is it helps us target the carbon prices directly, but ETS aims to reduce all carbon dioxide emission volumes. So this is one of the sole systems that will help us reduce it. And second, allocations. There's this concept, allocations being made free of charge. They are either tendered or given free of charge. And if we do it free of charge, this is going to reduce the financial burden of efficient establishments, and it will mean an incentive for them. And the third issue is this Ets system will provide a balancing pricing. So when you consider the economic cycles, when economy improves or worsens, you will have created a more balancing mechanism of sorts. And there is the linkage to international markets. And this is going to solve the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I don't want to go into the disadvantages, but what we know is most importantly, this excess of allocation or shortage of demand, that is all the stakeholders not being in the market, not being engaged or involved in the market, beginning with fewer number of stakeholders and increasing later on. And there is the adverse effect, likelihood of adverse effects of international shocks in the market. And about the monitoring of the system, there are certain problems that have emerged in international examples. And the Ministry of Environment has MRV, that is monitoring, reporting, and verifying. This is going to go beyond the assessment, but I think we seem to be in control. And when we look at the situation in Turkey, ETS and Turkey, there's a process from 2004 to 2021. The activities that started in 2004 were brought up until 2015 with PMR, the World Bank Carbon Market Preparation Committee, and in the Green Deal Action Plan, certain ministries and certain public institutions were given certain tasks and assignments. So there's a significant work involved in that. And let's look at the carbon markets across the world. And we see two markets. One is one of the biggest ones, European Energy Exchange. And the European Energy Exchange currently has about 25 EU countries that it is serving. And the concept of market here needs to be perceived as there's a primary market and a secondary market. So in the primary markets, there are tenders and allocations. And in the secondary markets, there are spot transactions and derivative transactions. So therefore, what is prominent, one of the prominent ones, the European Energy Exchange, holds about 90% of the European Union ETC tenders, and the other exchange is ICE, Intercontinental Exchange Futures Europe. This is one of the well-known ones. And this is one of the most liquid exchanges, and over 14 gigatons of carbon emission trading is allowed in this exchange. And as for the products, in the primary market, there are allocations and there are tenders, and subsequently there are spot transactions and futures. And futures and option contracts, this is a rather technical concept, but this is on the derivative side of things. And indeed, as Ms. Shirin talked about this, when it comes to risk management, both the companies and the countries view this as an important instrument. And in the ICE exchange, ICE futures, there are similar products that are being offered. EU ETS permits, EU aviation permits. There are 4 UK countries that can trade here. In EEX and in ICE, the stakeholders' involvement in the market can either be in the form of direct participation or just like us, through intermediaries, the way we access to our stock markets. And there are other structures, but at the end of the day, there is this reality that the ETS system helps capture country targets, and the carbon border adjustment mechanisms effect is reduced by this. And finally, when we look at the Chinese ETS system, as you know, in July, there was an ETS system that was founded. And on the first day, the carbon prices were down to $7.9. And I looked at it before I came. It is down to $6.7. But there is this good thing about Chinese ETS system. Up until now, there were about 326,000 tons in terms of volume, but it was up to 1.8 million tons as of yesterday. So therefore, this market, when you look at the fact that it's still very premature, this can be an example for us, because indeed only the energy market related companies can access the market. And there are certain shortcomings in terms of participants. That is why there's a low volume in the market. And we also need to talk about ICE futures, because right now the carbon emission permits are at the level of 66 euros, but in 2015, that was about 15 euros. So there is this 1.5 degree reduction that is increase that is targeted by all countries, and the carbon per emission prices are going up to $160, $170. So let me wrap up. At the end of the day, the ETS system is important both for our country and the companies that we are working with. Thank you, Kerem. You summarized many titles as a summary. This was a critical title, and also we need to address the agenda. I will wrap up a few articles and finish the panel. Actually, in the 10 steps in identifying ETS system and why these are important, and how our ministry needs to cover what kind of distances were discussed by you. And our ministry created a great system, and we will be providing and fulfilling every step and balancing compliance with the EU system and the stock market structure in the EU were depicted by you. And there is a $15 to $60 range, which could go up to 160, 170 euros, as you have summarized. And I would like to thank all the audience members, as well as our panelists who made this possible. You neatly summarized all very precious topics. And also we would like to thank the Capital Market Board for today's quality program, high quality program. I wish you many more congresses to come so that they can share valuable information with you and have